Hello and welcome. My name's Steve Chittenden. I work in the Data Protection Solutions division at Dell EMC, and this is one of our monthly webinar sessions that we hold for covering all aspects of data protection. I work in the enterprise space, but this is relevant across the whole spectrum, from enterprise to the commercial to mid-market type organizations. And most customers we speak to on a regular basis have a problem, and that is what to do with many years of legacy backup stored on multiple different generations of tape media. In line with the business wanting to leverage cloud for longer term retention or on-prem object store to really drive down the cost to protect that data. And many businesses agree this is a great thing, but they just don't know where to start. So this is a webinar we pulled together to help address that and show customers the way forward. So Index Engines are a very long-standing partner of Dell EMC, and this software can be procured through any normal channel or direct from Dell EMC, as you would any infrastructure. So I'm going to hand over to Jim from Index Engines to go through how you can make best use of legacy backup data you've got. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody attending today, this afternoon. My name is Jim McGann. I'm with Index Engines. We have Steve and Mark also on the call from Dell EMC. If you do have questions, there should be a question section over on the right side of your screen. Feel free to type them in. We'll also put up our email addresses at the end of the session, and you can contact each one of us individually to ask any questions as well. So those of you that are not familiar with Index Engines, we're a software company focused on information management, really to provide unstructured data and email management, archiving, support for a lot of governance applications. One of the unique attributes for Index Engines is it not only supports primary data, so data that's on your networks and file shares, but also backup data sources. We've engineered access to the common backup data formats so that we can process data in backup images, which we'll be talking about today, and how we can help you clean up legacy backup environments. We're located in the US. We've been in business since 2004. Dell EMC is our largest partner in terms of selling our technology. We also have partnerships with some of the governance providers like Ernst Young, FTI, and it's technology that's used at typically highly regulated organizations that have either privacy policies, including the new General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which has been in effect for a few weeks, as well as other types of governance policies. So a lot of financial services firms like Barclays, JP Morgan Chase, a lot of healthcare organizations, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and so on. So as Steve mentioned earlier, what Index Engines provides really is a transformative solution to really transform the process of managing typically legacy backup environments or legacy backup data. And why transform? Really, there's two aspects of that. First is customers have created or acquired legacy backup applications from mergers and acquisitions. So when you acquire a company or you merge with a company, and they may not be using your standard backup software, so assuming your backup software that you're using is either a Networker or Avamar, and they have a net backup environment, you typically transition that to a legacy environment and transition the company that you merge with to the Networker or Avamar environment. Or a change of backup vendor strategy. We do a lot of projects with Dell EMC where customers have migrated over to a Networker, Avamar, or EMC data protection strategy, but want to still maintain access to the legacy environment. So really, legacy backup applications really are non-production applications that exist within your data center. The challenge and the resulting issue that creates is that you have a requirement to maintain that legacy backup museum. We call it a legacy backup museum because at that point, your libraries, like your old LTO libraries, old media servers, old storage, old tapes, and so on, become really locked in not a production environment anymore, but it needs to be maintained to provide access to that legacy content. And then also the risk associated with using tapes for long-term retention. So if you've got an old IBM TSM environment, for example, and you've got some privacy requests or some legal discovery requests or some kind of regulatory requirement, and you need to get access to data that's on a 10-year-old TSM tape, that becomes difficult as those tapes age. So really the complexity there and the reason that customers really do attack these legacy environments is really the cost of maintaining that data center infrastructure to support ongoing access, and the requirement to really manage that to support governance and regulatory requirements. So what I mentioned earlier, the Legacy Tape Museum, many customers really don't realize the fully loaded costs of managing this environment. So a lot of customers just look at small components to that and realize that it may not be that expensive, but when you start looking at the full picture, they realize that it is costing them a lot more than they expect. One of the largest areas that we see is the backup software maintenance. So we see customers that are old customers of Veritas or IBM, seeing large increases in maintenance costs. And that maintenance costs can be fairly significant. So that's one component. The old tape library maintenance, we have customers that are running old DLT, old LTO libraries that are out of formal maintenance contracts, and they have to have custom or specialized maintenance contracts that get very expensive. The backup media servers, if customers are doing NDMP backups, they need to maintain NDMP servers for restoration. Also, offsite tape storage, not that expensive, but still a line item in your budget. Tape management expenses, so retrieving tapes and managing tapes, paying offsite storage vendors, that cost. And then there's the overall data center resources and staffing resources. So, with that environment, it adds up, and I'll talk about some of those total cost of ownership towards the end of this session and how we can help reduce that. But if you look at the fully loaded costs here, it gets very expensive. Some customers do retire some of the infrastructure, they do retire the libraries and so on. In that case, they'll need to use third-party consulting services to do restoration when required. So it's not recommended that you do retire for example, the legacy backup software, because that locks you into using these third-party consultants, which can be very expensive. So talking about backup data, there's a whole new world of governance related to this content, specifically the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which I mentioned earlier, which is now in effect. This is an interesting paper that Gartner, the analyst firm, has published in October of last year. This is available on the Dell EMC website. We can actually get a copy of this paper out to anybody that's attending. I'll mention that again at the end of the session and be able to get the link out as well. But the paper is very interesting. It talks about what Gartner calls file analysis, which is really data indexing and classification, reporting, and search, which is really the space that index engines it exists within the Gartner world. But there's a number of good points in this paper. One of the more interesting one related to backup tapes, and Gartner really goes out on a limb in terms of their positioning in legacy backup data, saying that enterprises often engage in long-term retention of backup to the point where data is unrecoverable or unretrievable in any meaningful way, unless it serves no business or operational purpose, but creates a potential hazard to GDPR compliance. So very strong statement from Gartner. A lot of organizations that we talk to, it's not uncommon to take tapes and move them into offsite storage as part of your DR cycle, but then leave them there for long-term retention purposes, and they become a long-term retention archive of all your data. So it's been a normal business practice. Gartner's saying that customers need to look at long-term retention and how they treat this data and rethink that process, especially if you have GDPR or privacy regulation requirements on that data. So let's talk about index engines a bit. The key here is that index engines is a fundamentally different approach towards managing legacy backup data. It is a unique technology. It eliminates the need for the original backup software Again, I mentioned that we really engineered access to common backup software formats. So as an example of what we can do, if you walked into our facilities and you handed us maybe 10 old IBM TSM backup tapes, what index engines could do is put them in the appropriate tape reader, scan those tapes, index the content, either a light index of metadata or a full content index of text, and then allow you to search on the index, find the data on tape, and extract that data. So if you wanted just one email off of that tape, you could search and find the one email that's in an Exchange or Notes database, for example, and extract that out of Exchange, out of the IBM TSM format off of tape, and retrieve that one email back without having to do any restoration or without the use of the original backup software. So again, very unique capability, eliminates the need for the original backup software. There's really three components to what Index Engines does. And this, as Steve mentioned earlier, this capability and all this software is available through Dell EMC or Dell EMC partners. The first component is backup catalog management. That's the most lightest touch or the simplest solution that Index Engines provides. That is the ability to ingest the catalog from the active media server. So if your example, you're running a legacy net backup environment, Index Engines can ingest the net backup catalog and manage the catalog going forward. Why would you do this? Why would you use Index Engines to manage it when you could use the original software vendor? One is that Index Engines is significantly less expensive, so Index Engines allows you to retire the legacy backup software. So at that point, if you ingest a TSM or a net backup catalog, you can retire TSM and net backup and not pay the maintenance any longer. And Index Engines, I'll show you some examples, is typically less than 20% of what the maintenance costs are from those original vendors. So that allows you to not retire the original backup software, but it also allows you to consolidate as well. So if you do have an instance of, for example, TSM and an instance of net backup, you can ingest them into one single Index Engines platform and manage it going forward and consolidate and retire, in that case, two different backup software. So that's a low-cost, easy way to get started. The second component is the ability to do ad hoc restores. So, for example, if you do have legal discovery requests or some kind of regulatory request of data that's on those tapes, you can use Index Engines to search the catalog and selectively do restores as you need to throughout the year. So that's going to allow you to support any kind of legal or compliance requests as needed. So that's really more on an ad hoc basis. So again, in this situation, the data can still reside on tape, leave it on tape, and as you need to do restores over time. That's not really going to solve things like the GDPR or privacy requests where you're going to get continual requests like right to be forgotten and so on. But in that case, you would really need to look at the third level here, which is really kind of looking at the data that's on in backup images on tape and migrate it to the cloud or disk. But typically customers put it in the cloud like ECS or VirtuStream, two great offerings from Dell EMC, and eliminate the tapes altogether. This is really for customers that are highly regulated, that are looking at doing support for things like the GDPR, is be able to move it into the cloud and manage it more effectively and apply retention policies to it and be able to search and find it and retrieve it as required versus offline tapes. So different levels here of solutions provided by Index Engines, from high-level catalog management, individual restores, down to full migration of the data. And again, the important point here is if you've got 20, 50, 100,000 tapes or more, you're dealing with hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data on tape. In the migration process, which we'll talk about further, you're not migrating everything. You're doing a very selective migration of the data of value and leaving behind the bulk of the content that exists on tape and not dealing with that. So, it's not really a process that's really going to bulk migrate everything. It's going to migrate only a small subset of the content. So when we talk about Index Engines, we talk about workflow. Workflow being different phases of that solution that I spoke about earlier. Here in the different phases are phase 1, which is really the catalog management, as I mentioned. Phase 2 is the ad hoc restores, and phase 3 is full migration of the data of value from tape. So with these steps, you can see here, it's a complete contiguous workflow that is well proven that will allow you to either do a very simple touch of managing the catalog, to providing ad hoc restores, to full-on migration. And I'm going to talk in more detail about each one of these components. The first component really is the ingestion. So ingestion is in dealing with the catalog. At this point, we're not touching any of the tapes. You can see here a screenshot of the catalog that was ingested. This is really connecting to a live media server and really pulling in the legacy backup catalog metadata from the catalog. It also captures the backup policies and backup properties and allows you to report on the catalog metadata, backup sets, barcodes, all that information. And if you can see here in the screenshot, you can see the backup sets that were ingested. You can get a listing of all the different hosts that were containing those backup images, the type of host types like Exchange or Lotus or Oracle backups, for example. And you can see here, it's a combination. This is a net backup ingestion here, as well as, I believe this was actually ArcServe. So it's net backup. So these are different backup images that were ingested. So Index Engines gives you the full reporting capability that you can filter. You can look for, incrementals or full backups and date ranges and so on. So again, this is just looking at the catalog. Many customers have said that Index Engines provides as good reporting, if not better, than the original backup software provides. Again, if you have multiple legacy backup environments, Index Engines can consolidate them into one single view here to be able to search and manage that content. Again, that's an easy process. It's a very lower cost solution to be able to allow you to retire the legacy backup software. So in terms of the supported formats, so for catalog ingestion, the supported formats are NetBackup, Veritas NetBackup, IBM's TSM, Commvault, as well as Networker. We support some of the, a lot of customers have old versions of Networker that they're supporting that they may want to consolidate as well. This requires direct connection to the active media server, so it's a direct connection and ingest the catalog. There's other backup formats, obviously, in the market today. Index Engines doesn't support the catalog ingestion, but they can be supported through catalog rebuild. So in this case, the tapes would need to be read and scanned directly versus connected to the media server. And this supports Backup Exec, UltraBack, Data Protector, it's not HP any longer, for Micro Focus, ArcServe, and others as well. So these are usually smaller environments. They can be supported through a similar process. The workflow is a little bit different than what it would be for something like TSM or Commvault or NetBackup. So in terms of catalog retirement, here's some, I mentioned the TCO and why you would do this. So these are some customers, 3 of them here in the US, one in Europe, and Dell Global. But you can see here what they were paying software maintenance. So this is the fully loaded maintenance cost of, say, for example, TSM versus the Index Engines or the price through Dell EMC as well, on what the customer paid for that solution. So you can see an idea, it's typically anywhere from 10 to 20% of the cost of the fully loaded software maintenance. So there's a number of large accounts here, Lear Corporation, which is an automotive manufacturing components manufacturer. You can see they were paying Veritas about $500,000 US, these are US dollars here, for net backup maintenance, where Index Engines, their annual cost there was reduced down significantly to $75K. So this is only just looking at the software maintenance, not looking at the other key performance indicators like the hardware libraries and other resources that exist as well. The second component is reporting, as I mentioned, to be able to report on the catalog metadata. So you can see some of the different reporting capabilities here to be able to do listings of backup sets and so on. So this will be used for, if you do have a restore request, you can search the backup catalog and the backup sets to determine which backups need have the data that needs to be indexed and searched. So for example, if you're looking for email from June of 2014, you can find the backup tape or the backup image from June 2014, and then index engines can process that for a restoration. But the reporting is really, you can filter by backup date, host, and policy. You can find types of backup by agent type. And looking at something like net backup, you can even look at file extensions and file sizes and modified time and so on. So this allows you to really search in detail the catalog to find the data that has data of interest for you. So at this point, Index Engines hasn't touched any of the tapes. In order to do restoration or to be able to search in more detail of the content that's on those tapes, Index Engines would need to index those. So in this case, you would need to retrieve the tape from storage, put the tape in the tape reader, the appropriate one, LTO, DLT, and then scan the tape. So you can see here, Index Engines is scanning the tape content. This is creating an index of the data. This could be done at a metadata level or full content level. Once the tapes are indexed, then that allows full, selective restore of individual files or emails from the tape. Again, there's no need for the original backup software. Index Engines manages this directly. We understand those backup formats and allow you to look at that at a high-level metadata or a full content level to see what's on those tapes and to do selective restoration. So if you want a single mailbox, you can do that. If you want a single email, that can be done. A single file, that can be done as well. So this indexing process is really allows you to really get access to the data that's on tape. Again, Index Engines doesn't expect that would be indexing all your tapes. It's just going to index the tapes that have data of value. So typically, indexing is not done on incremental tapes, possibly tapes that are database backups when you have no need for long-term retention of databases. Those could be ignored. But these are the tapes that really have the data of value on them. Once they're indexed, you have access to the data. So full access, in this case, you can see now in the reporting capability, you can see full detailed file listings. This will allow you to look and see what the content directly, allows you to search and restore individual files, as I mentioned. And in this case, you can just really use the search interface and look at specific content, file types like Word docs or PDFs based on owners or locations or file names or last modified dates, things like that, all sorts of metadata or content, if you do full content, to do restoration of the data. The next step is really moving into more, if you're going to do a migration, you need to do classification. So this is really developing a migration strategy to really determine what data has value on those tapes. So in the Index Engines platform, there's a number of reporting capability. This is looking at file types. So looking at files WordPerfect, PDFs, HTML type files. And you can develop these dynamic reports. Look at the data, develop a strategy so you can look at data by file type, dates, location, and so on. So what most customers do is do an analysis of the data and say what data is required really for long-term retention. So if you've got 10 years of tapes that go back 10 years, but you may only have a 7-year retention policy. So you can do a report and say, show me data that's been created in the past 7 years. Maybe it's certain types of data that has retention policies such as, only Word documents or PDF documents, of this type. So you can create these policies and really develop a migration strategy. And in doing that, when we look at the data classification, what you want to do is develop a strategy. So you're really migrating only the data that you need for long-term retention and leaving behind most of the content. And what we see at customer sites is typically 95% of the data typically gets left behind on tape. So it's only less than 5% of data really gets migrated. And really what customers do is they develop different types of retention policies. Here's an example of 3 of them. All of them, though, they filter out the redundant content. So there's a lot of duplicative content that exists on tape, obviously by design, because backup is really copying the same data over and over again. So Index Engines could say, let's ignore exact duplicate content. And that filters out a huge bulk of data that exists. And then eliminating age data outside retention, ignoring certain types of files. So potentially you don't have any retention policies for databases, for example, or other things like log files or things that really have no value on tape. And getting down to the data that you really need to maintain, which is really the relevant files and emails. So typical retention policies that are defined here is, some customers really don't have a great collaboration with their legal or their retention teams. So what they say is, well, let's just move a unique copy of everything off of tape. So again, that is filtering out the redundant content, but it's really not a lot of culling. So it's really a unique copy of everything. That's a large volume of data that's moving off of tape. Other customers can get into more detail and say, I only want data for the past X years, or be more specific, saying I only want certain types of files or only email from specific users. So depending on this migration policy, it'll determine how much data is going to be moving off of tape. But just be aware it's going to be significantly smaller subset of the content, the total content, because you really don't want to be moving everything off of tape. If you've got 10 years of backups, it took you 10 years to create those tapes. It's going to take you a decent amount of time to move all that data off of tape as well. The migration process. So once that migration policy is defined, within the interface, there's just really a simple point and click that you tag everything. Say this is the data that's tagged for migration, and then just say, select the migration target. So Index Engine supports either an NFS target, so we can migrate it back to disk. Some clients are moving it off of tape and moving it back into their data domain environment, or maybe an Isilon environment, or an existing archive. A lot of customers are moving it using an S3 cloud interface into the cloud, like ECS or VirtuStream, because the price point there is attractive, and they want to keep this data, at low cost, because it's really been on low cost tape. They want to move it to another low cost target. So Index Engine manages the data, migrates it, maintains all the metadata, makes sure that the metadata remains intact, doesn't corrupt the content, and then moves it into really a single instance archives to make sure that all the data is managed appropriately and the index and the searchability of it is maintained. So that moves it into any of those targets, and then at this point allows Index Engines to manage it going forward. Some of the management capability is, the ability to continue to do a report, to apply retention policies to this data, allow you to search and retrieve data as needed. So at this point, the data is in an online source, whether it be cloud or disk, allow you to search, find, and just retrieve that data very quickly. Allows you to apply retention policies so you can expire data, which is a huge benefit of managing data in the cloud or on disk, is that you can expire data instead of keeping it forever. And at this point, the tapes can be shredded. There's no need to maintain the tapes any longer. The data of value has been moved and the data is shredded. So it's a very defensible process. We've executed this process for a number of global financial services firms. They've done their due diligence on the defensibility of this process and realize that it's defensible if they have to, bring it into the court and produce data for the courts that we don't modify that metadata or modify or corrupt any of the content. So that's the workflow. Here's some sample migration projects to give you an idea of timelines. So I think we break it down. This is a simple process. This is a 5,000 tape environment. So this customer had 5,000 tapes. It's all net backup, a mix of LTO 4, 3, and 2. And if you look at the data that's on tape, even 5,000 tapes doesn't seem like it's a lot, but this is about 3.6 petabytes. So you can see it, the tapes store a significant volume of data. And in this environment, the customer's like, well, that's a significant amount of data. We don't want to move all that. Let's look at what we need for long-term retention. So what they did was they did a first pass, which is the catalog ingestion. So Index Engines ingested the net backup catalog. The customer and Index Engines partnered to really do an assessment of what's in that catalog. And in this case, they were able to eliminate 30% of the tapes, saying we really don't need to manage anything that's past retention or incremental backups. In this case, they were weekly fulls, so they could eliminate the incrementals during the week, which eliminated 30% of the tapes. So that brought the 3.6 petabytes down to 2.5 petabytes. So decent amount of reduction of the data footprint. Then the second pass, this is actually touching the tapes. So in this case, since 30% of the tapes were eliminated, there was 3,500 of the tapes, down from 5,000, were loaded in tape libraries. And in this case, Index Engines manages the robotics of the library, let the library do all the heavy lifting here. And Index Engines would scan those tapes, filters out the duplicate content. That's a significant portion of it. And in this case, the customer was able to build a migration strategy that was very detailed. So looking at only unique emails and specific user files for the past 3 years, that brought down the 2.5 petabytes down to 126 terabytes. And then the customer needed to do this in 9 months time frame. So in this case, the Index Engines infrastructure required was 4 Index Engine servers connected to 4 libraries. And the rest of the work here is just really loading the tapes in the libraries. And as the tapes are scanned, the data of value based on that policy will be instantly migrated, in this case, to the cloud. They needed about 126 terabytes of cloud storage. And it's really a simplified process. And the transformed environment is obviously they could get rid of the tapes. Tapes were shredded after they were processed. They eliminated the legacy tape museum infrastructure, and then manage the data in the cloud for their long-term retention requirements. So it gives you an idea of a project, and we can develop these project plans for any size customer environment. If you look at the cost savings here for this project, you can see here the business as usual annual cost here. This is in US dollars, is about almost 300,000 US dollars. And you can see it here. It correlates over here to tape management costs. They were spending a lot of money doing restoration and retrievals of the data from tape. The tape storage costs, you can see here, that's not a large line item, but it's there. The backup software costs, they were paying decent cost for their Veritas software. And then the backup infrastructure, the libraries and the servers and so on. So building this analysis here, you can see they were spending about $300,000 a year to manage their legacy tape footprint. There was a one-time migration cost. They used third-party services to do this. And then if you look at the transformed environment, if you look at that, it's significantly less expensive. This includes, the cloud storage, staffing, which is minimal, and the cloud infrastructure to support that. So that brings down their transformed annual cost to about $56,000. And their 3-year cost savings were significant. So they had their driving, or the main reason they did this project was not only the cost savings, but mainly for the regulatory and governance requirements to be able to manage that data more effectively. So wrapping up here, I know we wanted to keep this fairly short, so we're going to keep it to about 45 minutes today. A number of different deployment options. This can be implemented on-premise. A lot of customers put this inside their data center to manage the tapes and manage the migration process there. We also have been working with a number of Dell EMC partners, specifically HCL, one of the global system integrators that has a presence globally. That is a partnership that we've created, this concept of a tape factory. A tape factory provides a facility. It's actually an HCL, secure HCL data center throughout the US and EMEA, where you can send tapes to, and they'll receive the tapes and process those tapes into Dell EMC Cloud, like ECS or VirtuStream, and do the heavy lifting for you. So we do have services partners that can do this. Many customers may not want to receive tapes back in their facility, but this allows it to be done at a trusted, secure provider that's offsite. So that's it. I mean, it's a very simple process. There's a lot of great technology under the covers. As Steve mentioned, this is a product that Dell EMC represents out there and is available through Dell EMC. We're happy to talk to you in more depth about your situation. We do have a number of white papers available. Here's our contact information as well. Index Engines on top, info at Index Engines. There's Mark and Steve's contact information as well if you want to reach out to them. But there is a copy of this paper that's available that talks about the migration process. If you also want a link to that Gartner paper as well, just reach out to us and we can get that out to you directly. But that wraps it up here. I don't know, Steve, if you have any closing words or want to contribute anything else to wrap this up for us today.
No, not really. I mean, unless there's any questions out there. I mean, we've thanks for the explanation, Jim. To me, this is a no-brainer, really. It just sort of makes it very simple and provides a clear path for customers that to get away from that headache and start to get benefit out of their data, as it were, and start to also apply analytics to it as well. But yeah, thanks for your time. Like I said, the session's been recorded, so we'll repost this out on social media. And if anyone's got any questions afterthought, yeah, please get in contact, and happy to have a follow-up session.
Yes, exactly. So there's our email addresses there. If you do have questions, reach out to the appropriate person. This is recorded, and we can provide you the link to the recording as well to share with your colleagues. But that said, I appreciate everybody's time today, and I know you're busy. And if you do want to engage further, please contact us, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you all, and have a good day.